What would you tell 23-year-old David Berkowitz today?
Turn around before it's too late, because destruction is coming, you know. And as far as I'm concerned, that was not me. That was not me. That name, I hate that name. I despise that name.
Which name?
That moniker, Son of Sam.
The date is August 10th, 1977, and a year-long reign of terror was nearing its final conclusion. 24-year-old David Berkowitz had been formally captured by New York police after a spate of 8 deadly shootings that had ravaged Yonkers, Brooklyn, and Manhattan for over a year. Authorities had dubbed him the .44 caliber killer, but to the media and New York residents alike, Berkowitz had another name: the Son of Sam. But while his capture prompted a sigh of relief from the public, there was one man that was sure there was more to the story. Throughout the Son of Sam rampage, maverick investigative reporter Maury Terry always thought there was one glaring obvious oddity that kept popping up: the wildly different and very inconsistent eyewitness reports dealing with the description of the shooter. Police had collected no less than 5 different artist renderings of what people said the attacker looked like. Compared side by side, there are only about 2 that resembled David Berkowitz in the slightest. The others seemed to be of altogether different people. This sent the wheels in Terry's mind turning. From almost the very beginning, he was convinced that Berkowitz did not act alone. When Berkowitz was captured in August of 1977, it sent Maury Terry down a deep rabbit hole of conspiracy, devil worship, and political corruption. One of the first major clues that kick-started Terry's investigation was a letter that was sent to a news columnist named James Breslin. In the letter, the author writes a series of disturbing monikers which seems to indicate the surnames of alleged accomplices of Berkowitz's crimes. Names like the Wicked King Wicker, John Wheaties, the defiler and suffocator of young girls, and the 22 Disciples of Hell, as well as the symbolic glyph used as the killer's emblem. A symbol that traced back to a prominent occultist named Eliphas Levi. When Berkowitz was interviewed, he gave an outlandish account of how the dog of a neighbor had ordered him to commit the murders. But what stood out about the story, at least to Terry, was the name of Berkowitz's neighbor, one John Carr. When probing further, Terry discovered that John Carr's nickname was actually John Wheaties, and that, eerily enough, the street adjoining Carr's residence was named Wicker Street. But the real bombshell that sent Terry reeling was that John and his brother Michael's father was actually named Sam Carr. So in reality, John Carr was the real-life Son of Sam. When compared against some of the artist's rendering of eyewitness accounts, the face of John Carr seems to be a dead match. Not long after Terry had begun to look deeper into John and Michael Carr, Berkowitz had backtracked on his motivations behind why he says he committed the murders and gave an ominous indication that he indeed did have accomplices. This spurred Terry onward, and he was more determined than ever to find Carr. But either by coincidence or design, John and Michael Carr disappeared shortly after Terry had begun his inquiries. Sensing he had hit a roadblock, Maury Terry began to uncover the various connections between the Carr brothers and David Berkowitz. He learned that Berkowitz had befriended the brothers at a local Yonkers party, and that it was Michael Carr specifically that introduced Berkowitz to a satanic coven that would meet regularly at Untermeyer Park, just a short distance from where Berkowitz lived. David attended these meetings regularly and described them as disturbing but fascinating at the same time. Activities such as drugs, the drinking of blood, and animal sacrifice were all said to go on at the dead of night in the heart of Untermeyer Park. Allegedly in attendance at some of these meetings was also a man named Ronald Sisman and a Long Island millionaire named Roy Radin, whose significance will come along further down Terry's investigation. Terry surmises that the moment Michael Carr introduced Berkowitz to the coven, he was immediately singled out as the, quote, fall guy for the group's planned shooting rampage across New York. Maury Terry also learns that the name of this supposed cult organization was going by. They called themselves the Children. 6 months after Berkowitz's arrest, Terry finally learned the whereabouts of John Carr. He had been found dead in a rundown apartment all the way in Minot, North Dakota. When Terry arrives in North Dakota, he is told that Carr apparently committed suicide under suspicious circumstances. During Terry's time in Minot, he learns that the New York cult that Berkowitz had allegedly belonged to might only have been a subsidiary chapter of a much larger organization that spanned the entire country. For years, Minot residents told of a cult-like activity that pervaded the surrounding countryside, activities that both John and Michael Carr were active participants in. It was known that the Carr brothers would regularly bounce back and forth between North Dakota and New York. When examining the scene of Carr's apparent suicide, Terry discovered that inscribed on a phone book was the exact occult symbol used as the signature for the Son of Sam. 2 years later, another suspicious death would see Terry once again hot on the trail of what he was now convinced was a secret occult conspiracy that was behind the Son of Sam attacks. Michael Carr was killed in a vehicle accident when he crashed into a light post at a high rate of speed. When examining the scene, Terry noted that Carr's automobile looked like it had been deliberately run off the road. To the reporter, it seemed to be a far-fetched coincidence that both brothers had died in such a close proximity. When bringing his suspicions to the police, Terry found that he was being stonewalled at nearly every turn. They had captured Berkowitz, and that was good enough for them. No further investigation was needed. Terry decided to return to Untermeyer Park to try and see if he could unearth any more evidence of the cult's involvement. While investigating, one of the Unsolved Mysteries' second unit film crew had received tips saying that regular meetings were still being held at the park. Upon further probing, the decaying corpses of several dead animals, most notably German shepherds, were found littering the grounds. The pets had been horribly mutilated in what seemed to be a ritualistic fashion. All the hallmarks of a satanic cult. In one of Berkowitz's court depositions, he was asked point blank if he knew the Carr brothers and whether or not they had been silenced to cover up their part in the Son of Sam shootings. David Berkowitz said yes to both questions. Going even deeper, Terry discovers that in all probability that it was Michael Carr that had introduced his brother to witchcraft and the occult through several connections he had made. Michael Carr had several drug and alcohol-related addictions that sent him to the Church of Scientology, a fringe pseudo-religion that was founded by L. Ron Hubbard. Carr and his brother worked their way up the ranks of Scientology and seemed to weave its philosophies with that of the darker occult aesthetics. Eventually, they discovered a group known as The Process, a splinter faction of Scientology that focused on more apocalyptic teachings. In time, The Process morphed into a full-on doomsday cult in which both the Carrs were deeply involved. The Process seemed to meld modern-day witchcraft with political left-wing ideology and a belief that social injustice throughout the world was so rife that the only way forward was through violence. One of the group's main tenets was to destroy traditionalism and replace it with their version of a utopian communist society. The Process spread far and fast, and curiously, one of the group's most iconic symbols was that of a German shepherd, the same breed whose many corpses had littered Untermeyer Park. In his investigations, Terry also discovers that one of the group's most notorious disciples, besides that of the Carr brothers, was none other than Charles Manson. After a time, the group allegedly went underground before disbanding. Only months later, the mysterious night meetings at Untermeyer Park would begin, and the children cult emerged. During the next 3 years, Terry would receive communication from both Berkowitz and a mysterious prison informant codenamed Vinny. Berkowitz would make vague and cryptic references that seemed to confirm that Terry was on the right track, but otherwise refused to speak to him in person, claiming that his own life was in danger if he divulged too much. The mysterious Vinny, on the other hand, seemed to suggest that Berkowitz had made a chilling prediction about a shocking double murder that occurred on Halloween night of 1981. A couple by the name of Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman were found beaten and shot to death in their Chelsea home in Upper New York. According to Berkowitz, Sisman had accompanied the cult on their last confirmed murder of a woman by the name of Stacy Moskowitz on the orders of another man, millionaire Roy Radin, who some claimed was the real leader of the children cult. Sisman was ordered to film a so-called snuff movie of the Moskowitz shooting, of which he still had a copy of 5 years after the Son of Sam killings had ended. Berkowitz claimed that Sisman was murdered because he still had a copy of the film, which the group feared would implicate them as a whole. Furthermore, Radin himself was killed not too long after Sisman, after he supposedly ordered Sisman's hit. In 1993, Maury Terry would receive a fair amount of vindication for his theories when he sat down face-to-face with David Berkowitz to conduct an intense and emotional interview. In it, Berkowitz expresses remorse for his part in the killings, but confirms that he indeed was a small cog in a very large wheel of conspiracy. But even with that, he refused to name all of his accomplices, somewhat stifling Terry's efforts to prove everything that he had compiled over the years. Shortly thereafter, Terry publishes his best-selling book, The Ultimate Evil, in which he chronicles his decade-long odyssey to uncover the truth behind the Son of Sam killings. Maury Terry died in 2015, having uncovered a web of unimaginable conspiracy that proved to many that the roots of evil go deeper than most of us would like to think. Maury Terry has been compared to the fictional character of Fox Mulder, obsessed with finding the truth, a truth that which in the end cost him everything. Terry was ridiculed, belittled, and patronized most of his career, but he refused to give up on the hunt. In the end, it is said that his very last words were, "Don't give up on the case. Find them." It reminds us that through it all, truth can be a burden far too heavy to bear.